Hi everybody, and thank you for tuning into this video about making charts using Microsoft Excel. You probably noticed in the spreadsheets that we created so far, including the spreadsheet we created last week, the 2017 yearly budget, that these spreadsheets don't look very pretty. They just take up a lot of space on the page. They don't necessarily fit within printable pages. It's just a lot of numbers, and when you look at it, your brain doesn't really make sense of trends and patterns and things. We do our best to make them look nice by shading, adding borders, changing the fonts, making some things bold, maybe indenting some cells. But really, in the end, it's really hard to make spreadsheets look good. They're not designed to look good. Remember, I talked about how one of the powerful things about Microsoft Excel isn't how it displays things, but it's more how it does automatic calculations of data that you put in and can very easily redo those calculations if things change as long as you use formulas. Well, here's the thing. It doesn't really affect the spreadsheet itself, but Microsoft Excel does have built into it a way of making data look nice, and that is using charts. Charts take numerical data and display them in ways that show patterns and reveal information that makes sense to your brain. And that's what we're going to be working on today. We're going to be using charts in Microsoft Excel to display the data from last week's assignment in a meaningful way. So to begin, we're going to open up this Charting and Forms assignment sheet. Let's just sort of take a look through this right away and see what sorts of things we're going to be doing. First off, we're going to be creating 4 different charts, and they're each going to have their own sheet. So they're going to be on separate named sheets. And they're going to be a column chart that includes this information, a pie chart with different information, a stacked column chart with different information from the spreadsheet, and then finally a bar graph with different information yet. So what's going to be important is that we know how to create each of those 4 types of graphs, and that we look at this information that will be included in each one carefully so each one shows the right thing. Also, we're going to be adding a gradient fill to a column in our data sheet, so that's one thing that's required. There's a note here. We're going to be doing some important things using non-adjacent cell ranges in Microsoft Excel. That's what it's called. That's when you select 2 ranges of cells that aren't touching each other. I'll show you what that looks like when we create our first chart. But there is a difference between PC and Mac users here. On a PC, we're going to use the Control key. On a Mac, we use the Command key. Other than that, it works exactly the same. Here's an important note. We need to make sure all of our charts have appropriate titles and labels. We already mentioned that each one's going to be on a separate sheet, and then we need to save it. Okay, so let's get started with this. And to start, I'm going to open up my instructions on one side of the page. I'll open up my spreadsheet on the other side of the page. And the first thing we're going to do is create a column chart that shows the totals for all of the expenses. Let's get started with that. And I'm going to actually make my spreadsheet full screen for this so that we can see the entire thing. And I need to show, make a chart that shows the totals for each of these expenses. Here's the correct way to do that. First of all, we need to select, when making a chart, the category titles or labels that are going to go into our chart. And to do that, we just click and drag over all of the labels. These are going to be the different data points, the different bars or columns that are going to be in my column chart. The other thing that I need to do is to select the data, the actual numbers that go along with each of those data points. So I'm going to select the total expenses for each of those. But how do I do that when the total expenses are all the way on the other side of the page? I can't just click and drag across because it'll select every single column in between. Here's the trick. You need to select, first of all, just like you would by clicking and dragging, select the range that includes the categories. Next, you need to hold down the Control key on a PC or the Command key on a Mac. You need to press that key and hold it down, and then select the next range of cells that are going to include the data. When I click and drag there, notice that both ranges of cells are selected. Also notice that I have the same number of categories as I do of total amounts of numbers. I have 8 categories, 8 amounts. That's going to be important in correctly making a chart. Now, when I want to create my chart, I simply go to Insert, and then I find the Charts section I'm gonna click on recommended charts. That's always a good place to start. It's going to recommend several different charts you may want to use. In this case, I'm going to choose the column chart or clustered column chart. And when I click OK, I see that it created a column chart that has each of the categories and shows a column that represents the amount of each category. There's a bunch of things that you can do with this chart. I'm going to show you some of them. For this chart, you're only required to do a couple of things, but I'm going to show you some other things that you can do as well. One thing that you can do, notice that when I've selected my chart, automatically up on the ribbon, I'm in the Design tab of Chart Tools. I can change the colors of my chart here, which changes the colors of the entire chart according to prearranged color schemes that the Excel designers decided looked good. So if I wanted to change the colors of all of the chart, I could use that. If I want to change colors of individual things, I can click on any element in the chart. If I double click, it brings up a special formatting window on the side, and there's all sorts of options over here. I could choose to give this text box that says chart title, I could choose to give that a solid fill. And then I could choose the color that I want that to be. Now, that looks ugly, so I would probably never do that, but I could do it if I wanted to. I'm going to undo that change. Here's something you may use. You can select the bars of the chart by clicking on any of the bars. You can select an individual bar, but once you have all of the bars selected, just click one individual one. Notice that now just groceries are selected, and you can change the color if you wanted to of just that one bar. What that allows you to do is emphasize something in your chart that otherwise wouldn't have really been drawn out. Now, there's something special about groceries I could tell just by looking at the way that this chart is designed. Now, you're not required to change the colors or the formatting of this particular chart, but there are a couple of things you are required to do. First off, you're going to give the chart a title. So you just click on the chart title, and then you need to click again to enter it. If you double click on the words chart title or triple click, it'll select the entire title for you. And when you do that, you just need to give it a title that makes sense. In this case, I'm going to call this chart expense, we'll say 2017 expense totals. That makes sense to me as a title for this chart. The other thing you're required to do is include axis labels where you need them, where something is not immediately obvious what that part of the chart is showing. So I would not require it for anything that has dollars and cents. It wouldn't really make sense to be displaying anything here other than the total amount of the expenses, right? Because this already has currency labels on this axis. So we're not so worried about that. But down here, it might be helpful to tell whoever's looking at this chart why we selected these things. So here's how I'm going to do that. Over here on the upper left, you see this option in the ribbon to add a chart element. And you'll see there's all sorts of options. I could put grid lines in my chart. I could give my chart a legend if it doesn't have one already. I could remove a legend if it does have one. There's all sorts of cool things I could put in here. I need axis titles, and I need to add a primary horizontal axis title. Down here for the title of this chart, I'm going to call this expense categories. Then everybody knows that I thought through which categories of expenses I was going to include in this chart. All right, that's the basics of making a chart. If you can do that, you can make any type of chart in Microsoft Excel. Now, just so you know, there's going to be different sorts of options for different charts depending on what kind of chart you use. This add chart element list will change for a pie chart compared to a bar chart compared to a column chart. It's going to be a little different. So just so you know, there's other things that you can choose to do, but for this one we don't really need to. However, I do need to put this chart on its own tab. And now I just want you to notice for a second that in my Excel file called a workbook, right now I only have one spreadsheet, one worksheet, and it's called Sheet 1. Down here you'll see the title of the sheet. I'm just going to double click that, and I'm going to change the title of this worksheet to 2017 budget data, because this is where all my data is located. All right, now I'm going to add this chart as a new sheet in my workbook. To do that, I'm going to click on the chart. Up here in the Design tab of the ribbon, I'm going to select Move Chart, and I'm going to choose to move it to a new sheet, I'm going to give it a title. We'll call it the title of the chart, 2017 expense totals. All right, when I click OK, it should move it down. Now, I want it to display after budget data, so I can just click and drag this tab, and it moves it over, should move it over to a different location. There we go. Then we go back to 2017 budget data, and there we have it. All right. I noticed I accidentally zoomed in by scrolling. To zoom in and out, you can use this zoom slider down here. I'm going to zoom back to 100% where we should be. All right. I don't know if that, let's just do it that way. Okay, there. Now we're back to 100% on the chart. And then we go back to budget data. Let me just show you something. What would have happened if we would have made a mistake with that? Let's say I selected my data ranges. I'm going to select my expense categories. I'm going to select the total. And we're going to go to Insert. I'm going to go to try a recommended chart. And uh-oh, it doesn't display any recommended charts. When I look at all charts and try to select the column chart that I want, when I click to display that chart, it's just nonsense. Like the title doesn't make any sense. I've got nothing on the chart itself. If you look at the background at the spreadsheet, you see what exactly this chart is showing. Right now, this chart is just showing a region from column A, not the comparative regions from A and O that I'm trying to show. The reason for that, did you look at what I selected when I created this chart? I selected everything from expenses down to cell phones, and then in addition to that, I selected these. Notice that over here I have 9 categories, but over here I only have 8 total amounts. And Excel can't make sense of that. So it tries its best to make sense of what that chart should look like, but it's not correct. Here's something I want to show you that you can maybe use to fix a chart that has incorrect information. Now I'm just going to say this first. This tool that I'm going to show you is super complicated, and I would only recommend using this if it's not really easy to just go back and delete the chart and create it again. The tool that I'm going to show you is the Select Data option up here in the Design tab. If I go to Select Data, it's going to show me the inner workings of my chart, what Excel is using to decide what to display in my chart. Now, this Legend Entries or Series box, it's kind of a confusing name for it, but really what this is the numerical data that Excel has put into my chart. If I look at this, I notice that it's trying to use data from budget A14 to 22, and that's it. It's just trying to use column A data for this chart. Over here, I've got my horizontal category axis labels, and it's not trying to use any data at all. It's just trying to fill in what it knows. It knows that I have one column that I selected. It doesn't really know anything other than that. So here's how you can do this. And again, this is super complicated to do things this way. You might just be better off going back, deleting your chart, and creating it the correct way the first time. But here's how I would do this. In this series section, it's asking first of all for the name of the series. Now I'm just going to be honest with this. The name of the series is, actually let me just move my chart out of the way before we begin here. There we go. So back into Select Data, and I'm going to go back into editing the series. Okay. The series name is actually total because it's the total expenses. You're going to see in a while why that's not the best series name, but that's what it is. And then this series values, if I click on this option to select from my chart, now I could just click and drag over where the actual values are. And then if I click this again, it takes me back to where I was before. And now notice in the background, you see that my chart is correctly displaying the totals for each of the different categories. All right, so I'm going to click OK. I fixed this Legend Entries area over here, but now I need to fix the axis labels because it's calling them 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of their actual name. Here again, I click Edit. It shows me what it's already selecting, which is nothing because it didn't know what to. If I click on the Select Range option, it lets me click and drag over where the actual labels are. Then I click this button to accept, click OK, and look in the background, you can see now my chart is correct. Now, if I were going to actually make this chart, I'd have to give it a new title. I'd probably put in the bottom axis label and I would move it to its own page, but I already have this chart completed. So I'm going to delete this. To delete a chart, all you need to do is select so you have the entire chart selected. Do not just select the title, because if I delete with the title, it just gets rid of the title. Do not just select one of the axes or data points. Instead, make sure you have the entire chart selected, okay, by clicking the background of the chart. Then press delete and the chart will go away. All right, let's take a look at the next type of chart that I'm required to make, which is a 3D pie chart that shows the expenses just for the month of September. I'm required to show percentages and change the fill pattern on one piece of the pie. That's pretty simple and basic, but let's make sure we can do it because sometimes this can be difficult even if it appears simple. I'm going to select my expense categories again, hold down Control so I can select non-adjacent ranges, and I'm going to select the September expenses. Okay, so this is just the budget showing the proportion of September expenses compared to the whole pie. Now that I have those selected, I'm going to insert. I'm going to have it recommend some charts to me, but none of these is a 3D pie chart. They get close, they suggest a pie chart, but I need a 3D pie. And to do that, I'm going to go to All Charts. I'm going to select pie, and I'm going to look up here in my options, and I see there's a 3D pie right here. Click OK, and there's my chart. I do need to give this chart a title. I'm going to call it September 2017, expenses breakdown. Okay, because it's showing the breakdown of the different expenses that I incurred in my budget in 2017. Now, once I've got that taken care of, we need to adjust a few things in this chart. First off, I'm just going to make it a little bigger so we can see it. If I don't like the colors, again, I can go up here to change colors, and I could choose a color palette that more suits the need. Since it's September, maybe I want to choose something that looks sort of fall-like as my color palette. Now, you're not required to do that, but that is one thing that you can do. I can also go and add in chart elements, and notice that I have different options now that it's a pie chart instead of a column chart. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to include data labels on my chart, and you can see what that does as I hover over it. I'm going to choose the best fit because I can let Excel decide where those data labels need to be so everybody can see them. And then another thing that I need to do is I need to actually put the percentages on the pie. Now this is an option that's very buried in Excel, so pay attention where this is. I go to Add Chart Element, and I go back to Data Labels because that's what I'm concerning myself with. I want the percentages to display as data labels. But I don't see that option anywhere in here, so I'm going to go to More Data Label Options. And notice what that did. That gives me a different menu over here to format just the data labels. Now, it almost is impossible to figure this out if you don't know where it is. Because you notice I got all these fill options, but the place I need to go is actually this last option, which is label options. And if I click this drop down, I see all of the different things I could make the labels contain, like the value from the cells. I'm not going to do that. A series name, a category name, the percentage, which is what I want. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the value because we don't really need the actual value for this. We just need the percentage. And I'm also going to include, just to make this look a little nicer, the category name for each of the different categories. Okay, so that's what it takes in order to be able to show percentages on each cell. Make sure that you are thinking carefully about how you're doing that. Again, I'm going to show you where I got there. Add chart element, legend, data labels, more data label options. You go to Add Chart Element, Data Labels, more data label options. That'll give you this menu over here, and then it defaulted to showing fill. I clicked over here on label options, and that's where I found the different options for how my label will look. All right, that's what we needed to do there. There's one other thing that you're required to do with this chart, and a couple of things that aren't necessarily required. Because I already have my categories displaying on each piece of the pie, I'm going to click on the edge of the legend down here. I'm going to press delete. I'm just going to get rid of the legend. I prefer showing the data labels on the pie pieces because if you print this, you're not going to be able to tell the different colors in grayscale if you print it in grayscale. I actually like having the text where it belongs. Now you'll notice that some of the text is a little difficult to read, so if you go to the Home tab, you can change the color of the text to black to make it look a little easier. And then lastly, the thing that you're required to do, I'm going to click on the pie to select the information that's actually in the pie. So notice I've got all of the pie pieces selected now. Then I'm going to click one more time to select a specific pie piece. I'm going to select rent and utilities because it's the biggest. Now remember, before with a column chart, you could click on an individual column and change properties of just one column. You can do that with pie slices as well. I'm going to click and drag this pie slice, for instance, and drag it away from the pie a little bit so I can emphasize it a little more. Rent and utilities was the most expensive thing, and this is how big a piece of the pie it was. Now I need to change the fill for this slice of the pie to a pattern. Here's what I'm going to do that. If I double click this slice of pie, I get a format data point menu on the side. And then one of my options here is this paint can, which is the fill options. I'm going to choose a pattern fill. And I get to choose whichever pattern I want. Maybe I want to choose this trellis pattern. I can change the foreground and background colors. Let's say I still want the whole thing to be that brownish color. So let me change it to that. If I change them both for the same thing, notice what happens. My pattern disappears. So one of them has to be different. Maybe I want it to be a lighter brown. There we go. Does that look ugly? Yes. I would probably not put this in an actual chart. Maybe you can find a better pattern than the one that I used. But you do need to include a pattern fill somewhere in your chart. Just by the way, notice what other options you have. You can use a gradient fill. For this, you need a pattern fill, but you could, for a real chart, for a real assignment, choose a gradient fill where you have colors fade in and out. Or you could actually choose to fill in a picture that you've taken. So lots and lots of different options. However, this chart is complete for what we need it to be. I'm going to double click the chart. I'm going to move the chart up here in the upper right to a new sheet. And the title is going to be September. I'm just going to use Sept 2017 expenses breakdown. So now I've correctly got my pie chart on its own worksheet in my workbook. This is what this should basically look like. Yours might look a little different because you may have used some different options than me. But now we're ready to move on to the next step, which according to the instructions is to create a stacked column chart that charts the net income, total expenses, and total savings for January through December. All right, let's get that one started. Now, again, I need to select my axes labels, and I'm going to want my axes labels to be January through December, right? I want one column for each month. Then I'm also going to want to have net income as a label on the side. I'm going to include that entire row. I want my total expenses, and I want my savings. All right, let's see how this works the way that I've selected. I'm guessing this is going to have a few problems. I'm going to insert. I'm going to choose insert a chart. No recommended charts. Maybe I could tell it that I want a stacked column chart, and we'll see how this turns out. If I click OK, there's all sorts of problems with this. Notice that I only have 3 columns because it didn't know what I wanted to select as my different ranges, and just really messy. So again, I'm going to go up to the select data option here, and I'm going to tell it what I was looking for because obviously it couldn't figure it out. Let's see, my horizontal axis labels, I want those to be January through December. That's what I want my labels to be along the bottom of this chart. Okay? Then for my legend entries, I want to have 3 different entries. First off, I want to get rid of this first one because I don't want to chart January through December. I'm just going to remove that. This next one is the net income one. Let's just take a look and see if this is correct. Notice that I've got net income selected from January through December, but I've also got this blank cell in here too. I don't really want that blank cell. Now, let's fix this. First off, the series name is just going to be what this series is called. That's going to be net income. I'm going to click right there. That's going to be the name of this series. And then the values, the actual data that's going to be entered, I'm going to click so I could select data, and I'm going to select the row of data all the way through December. I'm going to accept that. Let's see. There must be an error in the formula, so I'm just going to go back. I'm going to delete what's in there right now and try again to select. There we go. And now that I accept that, now it worked. Hey, this chart is actually starting to look like it should. Next, I need to do the same thing with total expenses. Edit. I want the series name to be right here, the word total expenses, and I want the series values. I'm just going to delete what's in there already. Ooh, it's making it hard to do that. All right. So I'm going to try again to just delete what's already in those series values. Okay, and again, this is the total expenses, so I want to select the row of total expenses. Notice I'm excluding that blank space I had in there before. And then when I accept that and click OK, now that looks okay in the background. And lastly, my savings. Again, I'm going to edit the range so that the series name is just the word savings, and the series values contain the values from C26 all the way over to N26. And if I hit enter, this is the correct stacked column chart for my net income, expenses, and savings for the year. Now, when I click OK here, you'll notice the word savings is all lowercase and looks kind of ugly in my chart. Because I selected it as one of the actual values that it's drawing from this cell. I didn't just type in savings as a title somewhere. So if I change what's in this cell, let's make this bold and let's make it say savings in all caps. Notice that it automatically changes it in my chart to look like everything else. It's kind of like using a formula to populate the chart. And then don't forget to give this chart a title. I'm going to call it income, expenses, and savings breakdown. And I think I'm going to also put the year in front of it like I've been doing with the other one. So we're just going to say 2017 income, expenses, and savings breakdown. Last step is to make this its own worksheet. So I'm going to make a new sheet, and we're going to call it the same thing, 2017. If I move this, I could see income, expenses, and savings. Ooh, look at that. It actually doesn't let you enter more than a certain amount of text in one of these tabs. So we're going to have to figure out a way to make this shorter. If I change this instead of income to inc, expenses to exp, and savings to sav, now I can at least type in there enough to make it look like what it is. So I'm going to click OK. The other thing that making really long titles for these tabs does is you run out of space down here for all your tabs. Notice it doesn't even show my budget data sheet anymore. If you click on this ellipsis right here, it'll actually take you back to other tabs that are further to the left. Let's see if I select the right things right off the bat, if I could get it to display a chart, a stacked column chart that's a little closer than the one that I had originally that I had to do all those manipulative adjustments on. What if I just clicked net income and selected that entire row? I'm holding down control. I'm going to select total expenses. I'm going to skip again this blank cell and select this entire row here. And then savings, and I'm going to select this row. What if I selected this data first and then inserted a recommended chart? Well, first off, you notice there's no recommended charts, and that's usually a bad sign. But maybe it did create a correct chart. So let's just see. Column. I'm going to choose stacked column and click OK. Notice that when I select the right data in the right order, the chart displays pretty closely to what I wanted. I do have my net income, total expenses, and savings correctly in this chart. The only thing that's incorrect in this chart is the months. I need to display months along the bottom. That's much easier to do though, right? Because all I need to do is go up here to select data, and then look at my horizontal labels and select the label range that I wanted. and that very quickly fixes the chart. So make sure that when you select the data to go into the chart, you're selecting something that makes sense in an order that makes sense, and it might just happen that your chart creates correctly the first time instead of having to go back and readjust a lot of things. All right, I'm going to delete this, and then we're going to go back down to our instructions, which tell us that the last type of graph we need is a bar graph that shows rent, groceries, and car payment just for the month of January. That's actually pretty easy to make. We're going to start with rent. I'm going to select the rent cell and the associated data point by holding down Control. I'm going to select groceries and the associated data point in January, because all I'm showing is January. And then the car payment and the associated data point in January. And then I'm going to go up to Insert, and I'm going to insert a recommended chart. And in this case, I'm going to choose a bar chart. I'm going to click OK, and sure enough, this is showing my different expenses. If I make it bigger, the bottom axis looks better. I'm going to give this a title, and we're going to call this bar chart expenses for January. Now these are just 3 specific expenses for January, and we're going to use 2017 here as well. Okay. Now you know how to create different kinds of charts. You also know how to take those charts and move them so that they are their own new sheet in your workbook. And you even know how to troubleshoot just in case when you create a chart, the information in the chart doesn't show up correctly, and you can't really figure out what's wrong just by looking at the chart itself. You know how to go up to the Select Data option and see what your chart is actually pulling from your spreadsheet. Make sure that you have all of these charts completed in addition to this very last thing that I'm going to show you that really isn't a chart, but sort of looks like one and sort of does the same thing. I'm going to go back to the Home tab. I'm going to go back to my 2017 budget data after I move this chart over to where it belongs. So I'm going to click on the ellipses a couple of times. All right, and I'm going to go back over to the budget data. The last thing that we need to do is we need to insert conditional formatting into our percentage cells here. And not all of the percentage cells, just the ones that have the different expenses. Now, according to the instructions, we're supposed to use conditional formatting to put gradient fill data bars into the expense percentages. So the way to do that is we select all these expense percentages, we go to conditional formatting, we choose data bars, and you can select whatever color gradient fill you want. I'm going to select this yellow one. Now notice what this does. Like I said, this is sort of like a chart. It actually displays within your spreadsheet the amount compared to the biggest amount that each of these takes up. So 18 is the biggest amount, and it just filled in that cell with a gradient to show that 18 is like the biggest one of these. 6% then is filled 1/3 the amount that 18 is filled, because 6 is 1/3 of 18. 3 is 1/6 of the amount. 11 is more than half. Oh, so do you see how it kind of almost displays a bar chart in the background, even though it's not really technically a chart? But it just gives you an extra way to visualize the data and for your brain to make sense of it. That's all you needed to do for this assignment. Please save it and then turn it in as your assignment for Comms 101. If you have any questions on this, and I know there is a lot of information and a lot of steps to creating charts in Excel, if you do have questions, please make sure you ask them. Have a great day.